It was supposed to be a quiet afternoon, a simple family visit like so many before. But everything changed in an instant. My mother-in-law's face twisted with rage as she yanked my daughter's hair, slapped her hard, and picked up a piece of the shattered vase. Before I could react, she struck my innocent daughter on the head. The sound of her sobs filled the room, but what happened next was more terrifying than I could have ever imagined. Hello, my name is Ivy Jones, and I'm 35 years old. My life has always been a mix of challenges and blessings, but my family is the heart of everything I do. My husband, Caleb, has been my partner in life since our college days. We've built a life full of memories and shared dreams, but our greatest treasure is our 9-year-old daughter, Layla. Layla is an adventurous and curious child, always exploring the world with wide eyes and endless questions. Her imagination is boundless. Whether she's transforming our backyard into a magical forest or rummaging through old boxes looking for hidden treasures, she keeps us on our toes. But that's what I love most about her, her ability to find wonder in the simplest things. We've raised Layla to be curious, confident, and compassionate. Our little family is my source of strength, but there's always been a shadow that lingers. My relationship with Caleb's mother, Miriam. From the day I married Caleb, Miriam has been difficult to handle. Caleb warned me about her stern and controlling nature, but I tried to see her as someone who meant well, even if her exterior was rough. Our lives took a drastic turn one afternoon when we visited Miriam's house in Havenbrook, a small, quiet town where she lives alone since Caleb's father passed away. Layla was excited about the visit, especially because she had found a beautiful bird's nest with delicate blue eggs in our garden and couldn't wait to show it to her grandma. As we drove to Miriam's house, the air in the car was filled with Layla's excitement. She leaned forward from the back seat, holding her little treasure carefully. "Mommy, do you think Grandma has ever seen blue eggs like these?" she asked, her voice filled with wonder. "I'm sure she has, sweetie, but she'll love hearing about it from you," I replied, exchanging a warm glance with Caleb. When we arrived, the atmosphere was surprisingly welcoming. The scent of freshly baked cinnamon rolls filled the air, and soft music played in the background. Miriam greeted us at the door with her usual formal tone, but there was a noticeable warmth when she saw Layla. "It's good to see you all," she said, stepping aside to let us in. Although her tone was firm, her affection for Layla softened the edges of her words. Layla eagerly ran ahead to explore the house while Caleb and I helped Miriam with some chores. Everything felt peaceful, like the kind of day you treasure without knowing it will soon become a painful memory. After helping Miriam with the groceries and organizing the kitchen, Caleb and I sat in the living room for a moment to catch our breath. Layla had been quietly exploring the house, her imagination working overtime, as usual. I smiled, thinking about how much joy she brought everywhere she went. But that peaceful moment was short-lived. Suddenly, we heard a loud crash echo through the house, followed by the sound of something breaking. Caleb and I exchanged worried glances before rushing toward the noise. The sound had come from Miriam's formal sitting room, a space she always kept pristine and filled with antiques. As we entered, my heart sank. There, in the middle of the room, Layla stood frozen, tears already welling in her wide eyes. At her feet lay the shattered remains of a large, antique vase. It was unmistakably one of Miriam's prized possessions, a family heirloom that had been passed down for generations. I'm sorry," Layla stammered, her small voice trembling as she looked at the broken pieces. "I didn't mean to." The words had barely left her mouth when Miriam stormed into the room. Her eyes widened in shock as she took in the scene. The rage that followed was immediate and explosive. "What have you done?" Miriam's voice shook with fury. "That vase was irreplaceable. Do you have any idea what you've destroyed, you careless child?" Layla flinched, her tears streaming down her cheeks as she tried to explain. "I was just looking at it. I didn't mean to break it." But Miriam wasn't listening. She marched toward Layla, grabbed her by the hair, and yanked it forcefully. Layla screamed in pain as I rushed forward, my heart pounding in my chest. "Let her go," I yelled, pulling Layla away from Miriam's grip. Layla clung to me, her sobs muffled against my shoulder. But Miriam wasn't done. Her face twisted with anger. She picked up one of the large, broken pieces of the vase and, without warning, struck Layla on the head. The impact wasn't hard enough to cause serious injury, but it sent Layla tumbling to the floor, crying uncontrollably. I dropped to my knees beside her, my protective instincts in overdrive. Enough. Caleb's voice roared from behind me. He grabbed Miriam's arm and pulled her back. "What is wrong with you, Mom?" "She ruined it," Miriam screamed, pointing at the broken vase. "That vase meant everything to me, and your daughter destroyed it like it was nothing. She's a child." I shot back, my voice trembling with both fear and anger. "You had no right to touch her, let alone hit her." Layla continued sobbing, her small body trembling as I held her close. My mind raced as I tried to process what had just happened. This wasn't just a loss of control. It was something much darker, and I knew we couldn't stay in that house any longer. Caleb's face was a mixture of shock, anger, and disbelief. He stared at his mother, shaking his head as if he couldn't recognize her. I cradled Layla in my arms, her sobs breaking my heart with each breath. "We're leaving," I said firmly, standing up with Layla still clinging to me. Caleb nodded, his lips pressed into a thin line. He didn't say another word to his mother as we walked toward the front door. Miriam stood there, glaring at us, but she didn't try to stop us. Her anger was so consuming that she didn't seem to care that her son and granddaughter were leaving in tears. As we stepped outside, the cool air hit me like a wave of relief. But the tension in the car was suffocating as we drove home. Layla sat quietly in the back seat, her small body curled up as she wiped her tear-streaked face with her sleeve. I kept glancing at her through the rearview mirror, my heart aching at how pale and shaken she looked. "We need to take her to the hospital," I whispered to Caleb. He glanced at me, his grip on the steering wheel tightening. "She hit her head. I can't take any risks." "You're right," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "We'll go straight there." When we arrived at the hospital, Layla's whimpers broke my heart all over again. She clung to my hand as we entered the emergency room. The nurses were kind and gentle, quickly guiding us to an examination room. A doctor arrived soon after, carefully examining Layla's head and checking for any signs of serious injury. Caleb and I sat silently by her side, holding her hands as she lay on the examination bed. The doctor reassured us that there was no internal bleeding or fractures, but Layla had visible bruises and a small bump on her head. "The physical injuries will heal," the doctor said softly, "but you should monitor her closely for emotional distress. Something like this can be traumatic for a child." I nodded, biting my lip to hold back tears. Caleb sat beside me, his hands clasped tightly together, as if he were praying for strength. I knew he felt just as helpless as I did. As we waited for Layla to be discharged, she clung to her stuffed animal, her fingers gripping it as if it were her only sense of safety. The image of Miriam pulling her hair and hitting her replayed in my mind like a nightmare. I couldn't believe that the woman I had tried to respect and understand had done something so cruel. Caleb finally broke the silence. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I never thought my mother was capable of this." "It's not your fault," I said, squeezing his hand. "But we have to protect Layla. We can't let her go near Miriam again." Caleb nodded, his jaw tightening. "We won't. I promise." We sat in that hospital room, waiting for Layla to be cleared to go home, but I had already made up my mind. This wasn't over. Miriam's actions wouldn't go unpunished. Once Layla was discharged, we drove home in silence. Layla had fallen asleep in the back seat, her face peaceful, but I knew that the emotional scars she carried would be far from easy to heal. As I watched the streetlights flicker past, my mind was racing. I couldn't shake the image of Miriam yanking Layla's hair and striking her with that broken vase piece. It felt surreal, like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. When we got home, I carried Layla to her room and tucked her into bed. She stirred slightly, but didn't wake. I gently brushed her hair back, pressing a kiss on her forehead. I promised myself that I would never let her feel unsafe again. Closing her bedroom door quietly, I headed to the living room, where Caleb was sitting on the couch with his head in his hands. I sat next to him, my hands resting on my lap as I gathered my thoughts. "We have to report this to the police," I finally said, breaking the silence. Caleb didn't look at me immediately. He was staring at the floor, his jaw clenched. "I know," he replied softly. I never imagined my own mother would put us in this position." "I know it's hard," I said, placing my hand on his arm. "But she hurt Layla. She could have caused serious damage, physically and emotionally. We can't ignore this." He lifted his head and met my gaze, his eyes filled with pain. "I'm with you, Ivy. Whatever you think is best, I'll support it." Taking a deep breath, I reached for my phone and dialed the police station. My hands trembled slightly as I spoke to the officer on duty, explaining the incident in detail. I could feel the weight of each word as I described how Miriam had yanked Layla's hair and struck her with a piece of the broken vase. The officer listened calmly, asking questions when necessary, and assured me that they would send someone over to take an official statement. After hanging up, I leaned back against the couch, closing my eyes for a moment. It all felt so surreal. Filing a police report against Miriam wasn't something I ever thought I'd have to do, but here we were. "I'm proud of you," Caleb said quietly, breaking me out of my thoughts. "I know this isn't easy." "It's not," I admitted, wiping away a stray tear. "But Layla's safety comes first." The next few hours were a blur. The police arrived at our home, and I gave a detailed statement of everything that had happened. Caleb added his account, backing up everything I said. The officers took photos of Layla's bruises, and although it was painful to see her injuries documented, I knew it was necessary. Before they left, one of the officers said, "We take cases of child endangerment very seriously. Given the nature of this incident, charges will be filed against Miriam, and she'll be taken in for questioning." I nodded, feeling both relief and fear. Relief that Miriam would face consequences, but fear of what this would mean for our family. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions and legal procedures. Early the next morning, we received a call from the police informing us that Miriam had been taken into custody for questioning. The officer explained that she was being charged with child endangerment, physical assault, and battery of a minor. Hearing those words filled me with mixed emotions, relief that she was facing consequences, but sadness that things had come to this. Caleb and I sat at the dining table after the call, sipping our coffee in silence. He stared into his cup, his brow furrowed with worry. "I can't believe it," he finally said. "She's my mom. But at the same time, I can't forgive what she did to Layla." "I know," I said softly, reaching across the table to hold his hand. "But this isn't just about forgiveness. It's about protecting Layla and making sure Miriam understands what she did was wrong." That afternoon, we met with a family lawyer to discuss the legal options. The lawyer, Ms. Fiona Hartley, was a calm and reassuring presence, guiding us through the process of filing for a restraining order to prevent Miriam from coming near Layla or our family again. "She won't be able to contact you or approach your home," Ms. Hartley explained. "And given the severity of the charges, she's facing significant jail time." Hearing that was like a weight lifting off my chest. For the first time in days, I felt like we were truly taking control of the situation. A few weeks later, Miriam's trial began. The courtroom was packed, and the tension in the air was suffocating. I sat in the front row with Caleb, holding his hand tightly. Layla wasn't present. Thankfully, the court had granted our request to avoid making her testify in person. Instead, the evidence presented included Layla's medical records, photos of her injuries, and the police reports. Miriam sat at the defendant's table, her face pale and expressionless. Gone was the stern, controlling woman I had known for years. She looked small, defeated, and fragile, but I couldn't let myself feel sorry for her. Not after what she had done. The prosecutor laid out the case with precision, emphasizing the fact that Miriam's violent outburst had put an innocent child at risk of severe physical and emotional harm. The broken vase, once a symbol of family history, had become the centerpiece of the prosecution's argument, a metaphor for Miriam's inability to prioritize her family over her pride. Our lawyer presented our side with clarity, showing how the trauma had affected Layla's daily life. We shared the steps we had taken to help her heal, including therapy and counseling, but the damage was undeniable. Miriam's defense lawyer tried to argue that it was a moment of temporary frustration and that Miriam had no history of violence. But the evidence was too strong to ignore, and the prosecution countered that Miriam's obsession with control had led her to cross a line that could never be undone. After days of intense testimonies and emotional recounting, the courtroom was filled with hushed silence as the judge prepared to deliver the verdict. My heart pounded in my chest, my hands gripping Caleb's tightly. We had relived the trauma over and over during this trial, from Layla's cries of pain to the sight of Miriam standing over her with the broken vase piece. Now it was time to hear whether justice would be served. The judge's voice echoed through the room as he announced the jury's decision. We find the defendant, Miriam Hayes, guilty on all charges, including child endangerment, physical assault, and battery of a minor. A rush of relief overwhelmed me. I didn't even realize I was crying until Caleb gently wiped the tears from my cheeks. I glanced at Miriam, who sat motionless at the defendant's table, her head lowered. The woman who had once been a force of control in our lives now looked defeated, but my sympathy was gone. She had crossed a line, and her punishment was deserved. The judge continued, outlining her sentence. Miriam Hayes, you are hereby sentenced to 6 years in prison. Additionally, you are prohibited from contacting the victim or her family during your incarceration and after your release, under the conditions of a permanent restraining order. Hearing those words felt like a weight being lifted off my shoulders. Miriam's access to us had been permanently severed. She wouldn't be able to hurt Layla, or any of us, ever again. Caleb sat still for a moment, his eyes focused on the floor. I knew the emotional toll this was taking on him. No matter what his mother had done, she was still his family. But as I reached for his hand, he squeezed mine tightly, silently telling me that he understood this was the right outcome. When the session adjourned, we left the courtroom hand in hand. Outside, I took a deep breath of fresh air, feeling as if I could finally breathe freely after weeks of tension. It's over, I whispered, more to myself than to Caleb. Caleb looked down at me, his eyes filled with both relief and sadness. It's over, he agreed. Now we can focus on what really matters, Layla. In the days following the trial, the reality of Miriam's absence slowly sank in. While it was a relief to know she couldn't harm us anymore, the emotional damage lingered. Layla's laughter wasn't as bright as it used to be, and she had become more cautious, often clinging to me or Caleb whenever we left the house. We knew healing would take time, and we were prepared to do whatever it took. To help Layla recover, we continued her therapy sessions with a child psychologist. At first, she was reluctant to talk about the incident, but with the help of creative activities like drawing and role-playing with dolls, she began to express her emotions. One day, during a session, she drew a picture of herself holding my hand with the words, "I feel safe with Mommy." Seeing that brought tears to my eyes, but it also gave me hope. Caleb and I also sought counseling for ourselves. I had been carrying so much guilt for not stepping in sooner, guilt for trusting Miriam despite the red flags. Caleb struggled with his own guilt and conflicted feelings about his mother. Through therapy, we learned to let go of that guilt and focus on being the best support system for Layla. Our friends and neighbors played a huge role in our healing process. They brought over meals, organized playdates, and sent supportive messages, reminding us that we weren't alone. Layla's friends helped bring back her playful spirit, and their laughter slowly began to fill our home again. On the other hand, Miriam's actions had become the talk of the community, and many people who once admired her distanced themselves. It was painful to see her reputation crumble, but Caleb and I knew that these were the consequences of her own choices. Months passed, and with every day, Layla grew stronger. Her laughter returned, her imagination soared once more, and our home, which had once been filled with fear and tension, now felt like a place of warmth and safety again. One sunny afternoon, we decided to have a family picnic in the park. The weather was perfect, with the soft breeze carrying the scent of blooming flowers. Layla was chasing butterflies with her friend, her giggles floating through the air like music. Caleb and I sat on the picnic blanket, watching her with smiles on our faces. "She's happy again," I said, leaning against Caleb. "She is," he replied, his voice soft but full of relief. "And so am I." Layla ran over to us, holding a small, oddly shaped rock in her hands. "Look what I found," she said excitedly. "It looks like it's from space." I laughed, pulling her into a hug. "Maybe it is, my little explorer," I said, kissing the top of her head. As we packed up our picnic and headed home, I reflected on everything we had been through. We had faced one of the darkest chapters of our lives, but we had survived it together. Miriam's actions had torn our family apart for a while, but they had also shown us the importance of protecting each other and standing up for what was right. As we drove home, Layla dozed off in the back seat, her face peaceful and content. I reached for Caleb's hand, and we exchanged a look of understanding. We had found strength not only in ourselves, but in our love for our daughter. We had learned that no challenge was too great as long as we faced it together. The past was behind us, and now, we were ready to embrace a future filled with love, safety, and hope. This wasn't just an ending, it was a new beginning, one that we would cherish forever. Thank you for joining me on this emotional journey. If this story resonated with you or touched your heart, please give it a thumbs up, leave a comment sharing your thoughts or experiences, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this one. Your support means the world to us and helps us continue sharing meaningful stories. Together, let's celebrate the strength of family, resilience, and love. See you in the next story.